Hi. Hi, my friends. Welcome back to Deep Six, the Deep State, and welcome back to me. I've been away on vacation for the last 4 days, and I'm sure you're all shaking and in cold turkey from not having heard the lunch alerts. But I missed you, and I hope you missed me too. It's so interesting to me to go through the news and the depth that I have to do it to do these shows, and it keeps me on my toes and really forces me to think through a lot of key issues, and I really appreciate it. Let me start with the unbelievable revelations that have come out about Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Russia. Apparently, one of the stories that was circulated in Clinton Cash, the wonderful book by Peter Schweitzer that first exposed the Clinton Foundation and their whole M.O. One of those stories in particular was about uranium, and that got the New York Times to cover it 2 days in a row on the front page. The first day is the lead article. And it was the most serious of these charges. But it now appears that that was only the very tip of the iceberg, that in fact there was much more substance to it, and there was not one bribe, but really two, actually you could argue three, to the Clintons to get them to go along with Russia on this issue. Let me explain it. Uranium, as you know, is the source of all nuclear power, and you need to find uranium. The only alternative is plutonium, but to make plutonium, I believe you need uranium. I'm not certain about that, but I think you do. And the United States does not supply its own uranium needs. We fall short and we have to import uranium. But even so, Putin determined that he was going to get a global monopoly of uranium, or at least a huge market share, and use that as leverage against anybody, including the United States, that needed uranium for nuclear weapons or peaceful purposes. So there was an effort launched, according now to the FBI, which has been investigating this, since 2005, to help corner the global uranium supply. My hat off, by the way, not just to Peter Schweitzer, but to John Solomon of The Hill, who played the key role in unearthing this stuff, and fantastic amount of digging to get this, because the FBI never publicized it. In 2005, Bill Clinton was invited by the president of Kazakhstan, which is one of the former Soviet states that became independent when the USSR broke up, and now is a separate country, headed by a monster, an absolute horrible guy, probably next to Kim Jong-un and one or two others, the worst ruler in the world, with an abysmal human rights record, a tremendously authoritarian government, and an incompetent when corrupt one to boot. And he wanted Clinton to come because if Clinton came and gave him a visit and recognized him and stood next to him, that would elevate his prestige in the world, and we would all, it would give him a new power, a new prestige that he's never had before and does not deserve. Clinton flew over, met with him, and then did an event with him, did a media with him, gave a speech, and then flew home. The reason Clinton did that was that there was a guy named Frank Giustra, Giustra, a Canadian mining executive, who put together $2.3 million that he gave to Clinton for coming to give this speech. I think $1 million of it was a speaking fee, and $1 million of it was a donation to the foundation, and so it was in several different forms. Giustra, by the way, over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, or 5 years, gave the Clinton Foundation over $100 million. In particular, he set up a new branch of the Clinton Foundation to focus on climate change and global warming issues, and he endowed that with over $100 million. What Giustra got from this, so the president of Kazakhstan got the prestige, Clinton got the money, and as usual, and the president, and when Giustra, who supplied the money, got essentially the rights to most of Kazakhstan's uranium. And his company, Eurasia it was called, got the rights to drill for and harvest mine that uranium. Justra then took that uranium and used it as a bargaining piece to get integrated into the global firm of Uranium One, which is a Canadian company that's like Enron, only for uranium. It's the top in the world, and a huge company. And he got a share of Uranium One, I think 16%, in return for bringing in this uranium stuff that he got from Kazakhstan. Well, Uranium One then was cruising along, and Putin came in and said to Uranium One, "I'd like to buy Uranium One." Now, Putin probably was behind the Kazakhstan deal in the first place, because Kazakhstan is still in effect a Russian satellite. They don't do anything independent, certainly not in the energy field, certainly not dealing with the United States. And now Putin came in and said, "I want to buy the whole Uranium One empire." But those holdings included 20% of the uranium in the United States, 20% of our uranium reserves they own through the mines that they own. And nobody minded it because Uranium One was a Canadian company. But now that Russia moved in and wanted to take it over, the U.S. government needed to vote on it. And it had to come before a group called the Committee on Foreign Investments, which was a cabinet-level committee of 7 or 8 cabinet secretaries, chaired by the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, with the Attorney General, Eric Holder, on the committee. And the committee had to assess if this was in the national interest for Putin to buy this. And at about that same time, Putin, about 3 months earlier, invited Bill to come to Russia, to Moscow, and give a speech to a bank that the Kremlin controlled, Renaissance Bank, for a fee of $500,000. So arguably this was the third bribe to Clinton. First one was the $2.3 million from Justra for the uranium and for the speech in Kazakhstan. The other was the $100 million for the Clinton Foundation, and this was a $500,000 speaking fee that literally Clinton puts in his pocket. That's income. Doesn't have to go to anybody or go through anybody. And coincidentally, 3 months after the speech, Hillary decided that this purchase of uranium was okay. And she had her deputy, who sat on the committee for her, vote in favor of it. And the deal was done, and Russia now owns 1/5 of the uranium deposits in the United States. Putin got his deal. Now, apparently, unbeknownst to anybody, starting in 2010, when this deal first presented itself, the FBI got involved, got interested, as they should be, and began an investigation that has gone on for 6 years, ending shortly after 2016. And the investigation involved infiltrating the Russian energy establishment, infiltrating Uranium One. They had people who they turned, who talked, and it showed a vast coalition of bribery and corruption and extortion and really mob thug tactics to take over Uranium One. Shippers were threatened, there were boycotts, there was blackmail, extortion, all kinds of horrible stuff. And the FBI amassed all of this evidence and did absolutely nothing with it, just sat on it. No publicity, didn't let a single word of it leak, kept it all protected. Now, there were 4 people who knew about it, okay? One was a guy named Robert Mueller, now the special prosecutor, who was the head of the FBI. The other was his successor, James Comey, head of the FBI. The third was Eric Holder, the Attorney General, in charge of the FBI and one of the members of this Committee on Foreign Investment as the Attorney General. And Richard Rosenstein, Deputy Attorney General, who appointed Mueller the special prosecutor. And Rosenstein was in charge of this FBI investigation. So the real story of Russian influence in the United States, not just for some amorphous goal, but for a very specific thing of taking our uranium supply, was known by the four principles that were motivating and staffing and creating this phony case of Russian influence and meddling against Donald Trump. Now, if ever there was anything that called out for a special prosecutor, that made it absolutely vital that we have a special prosecutor, this is it. And Trump has got to act on it. I can't understand why he hasn't acted yet, but boy, this one is a no-brainer. And I hope Trump does this. I hope he acts on it, but it certainly ought to be acted on.
Well, Dick, Marianne Carr says this sounds like a movie plot.
Yep.
And Thomas Hillebrand...
It's a horror movie.
Yeah, exactly. Other people have said that. Thomas Hillebrand asks, do you really see anything coming of Uranium One? Sessions won't touch it. He has recused himself. Rosenstein is involved, so he won't either.
No, Sessions has not recused himself on uranium. He's recused himself on the issue of Russian meddling in the election. He's free to go after this. And I think the key here, I've been trying to think of why Trump hasn't moved aggressively. And I think it may be that it's a very controversial thing to appoint a special prosecutor. And usually you need, as a political matter, you need a crescendo of demands to do it, coming from senators and from leaders of the Republican Party in this case. And I think now it's time for us to be our little crescendo here. I think that we should, that Republican senators should speak out on this, should demand a prosecutor. You know, this is far worse than the email scandal, because the email scandal was bad, but there was no demonstrable compromising of our national security. And there were classified cables that got released and classified secret information, but none that really you could say this really hurt the United States. This one really hurts the United States. And of all of the various Clinton pay-for-play stuff, most concern side issues like Morocco or Kuwait or United Arab Emirates. This one is Russia, and it's uranium. And symbolic of how important it is, the New York Times, in the middle of the election, gave it a lead article to broadcast the findings. And now this issue is multiplied enormously. And I think it's very important that there be a follow-up. Now, Fox News broke this story based on the reporting of Solomon and Cheryl somebody or other at the Hill. And so that it's now spreading through the news cycle. And I hope that it has legs, and I hope it really catches up. But it shows that the issue of Russian meddling was not isolated here, where there really wasn't any, but was part of a long-term effort over a 10-year period to gain material advantage in the United States.
Dick, Rochelle Coombs says it's reported today that Podesta's brother is involved too.
Yes, I forgot that angle, of course. Yes, you're right. Thank you.
That's Rochelle Coombs.
Thank you, Rochelle. I really appreciate that. I totally forgot that. Yes. Podesta's brother, Tony Podesta, is a lobbyist, one of the top lobbyists in Washington. And obviously, when John was in effect the chief of staff, political chief of staff to Obama as president, Tony had a very thriving lobbying practice going, because all he had to do was call up his brother and ask him to do stuff. And Tony was involved in this whole uranium thing. We don't know how yet. We don't know if he was paid, or undoubtedly he was. We don't know by whom or how much, but certainly thereby hangs a very important thread. And if you tug on that thread, you may unravel this whole thing. So that's an incredible piece of information, and I think I really hope that Trump gets busy and acts on it.
I do have some more questions here.
Oh, okay, let's take one more. I'm getting this
we
up.
have one from Annie DeFondi, and she asks, sorry. Dick, do you think Trump will release the gag order? It's obvious Sessions won't do it.
Yeah, but like I said, there's no gag order.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is not, no, it's fine. This is not a court order. It was something Sessions voluntarily undertook in his confirmation hearing. And it does not concern this uranium deal. It concerns emails or the Clinton Foundation or other stuff. not the Uranium Deal, because that's a completely separate thing. Now, I wanted to give you some perspective that emerged from a woman who I know. I had her on my radio show when I did a talk radio show in Philadelphia. I had so much fun with that. Did it for every afternoon for a year and a half, 3 hours. You think you're getting battered here with 40 minutes, but this was 3 hours. And I interviewed a woman named Sidney Powell, who was for 30 years, was a top federal prosecutor, working in 3 different U.S. attorneys' offices. And she wrote a book called Licensed to Lie. And it's about Weissman, Andrew Weissman, who is the guy who was appointed by Mueller, essentially as his chief of staff, to lead the investigation of Donald Trump. And it's largely Weissman who's the moving force there. She wrote, "Time after time, courts have reversed Weissman's most touted legal victories because of his tactics. This is hardly the stuff of a hero in the law. Weissman, as deputy and later director of the Enron task force, destroyed the venerable accounting firm of Arthur Andersen and its 85,000 jobs worldwide." Remember that scandal? It was one where Enron and Kenneth Lay, who was the head of it, was accused of hiding information from people and therefore artificially moving up the value of its stock. And there was apparently tremendous evidence that Enron was bankrupt and was facing bankruptcy. And Lay and the Enron people were accused by Weissman and the feds of sitting on that information, suppressing it. And it was a huge criminal case involving, I think, a multi-billion-dollar verdict against Enron. And Arthur Andersen was the accounting firm. And they were the guys who told Enron, "You're broke, and this is a very serious thing." But apparently Enron got Andersen to make claims in its report that weren't true, that said Enron could recover and this wasn't necessarily a lethal blow and so on. And the issue arose, are such statements by an accounting firm fraud by the firm or just a mistake? And the courts ruled in the lower court that this was fraud. And as a result, Arthur Andersen was forced to close. Now, subsequently, Chris Dodd, who's always been a spokesman for the insurance industry and for the legal community in this area, got Congress to change the law so that an accounting firm like Andersen would not be held liable, but under the law at the time, it was. The case went up on appeal, and the United States Supreme Court, 2 or 3 years later, unanimously reversed the Enron ruling, unanimously, citing Weissman's tactics, citing his suppression of evidence, his monkeying around with the truth, and singling him out for criticism. Next, Weissman creatively criminalized a business transaction between Merrill Lynch and Enron. 4 Merrill executives went to prison for as long as a year. Weissman's team made sure they didn't even get bail pending their appeals, even though the charges Weissman concocted, like those against Andersen, were literally unprecedented. Weissman's prosecution devastated the lives and families of the Merrill executives, caused enormous defense costs, unimaginable stress, and torturous prison time. Then the Fifth Circuit of the Court of Appeals reversed the mass of the case, and Weissman quietly resigned from the Enron task force, just as the judge in the Enron broadband prosecution began excoriating Weissman's team, and the press began catching on to Weissman's M.O. And this is the guy who's running the investigation of Donald Trump. She writes, "Mueller knows his history. Is this why he tapped Weissman to target Paul Manafort?" Quite a devastating accounting. Now, the firm that was behind the dossier against Trump, Fusion, has now been forced to testify, or at least 2 of their people have, before the House Judiciary Committee. And guess what? They took the Fifth Amendment. So they are saying that if you knew who paid for the dossier, and if you knew who provided the information to the dossier, this could result in our being exposed to criminal prosecution, and therefore we're not going to give you that information. I mean, it's a shield you can use, but it certainly implies something to hide. So now this entire case against Trump, this entire Russian deal, is resting on a foundation of negative research by a firm that has taken the Fifth Amendment in connection with how it amassed it. In any sane world, this would be the undoing of the whole investigation. Just incredible that happened.
Michelle Brayhout-Grevert wants to know, do you think Mueller was set in place to destroy evidence on everything?
I think Mueller was set in place to be the hitman to get Trump out of office. And his staff indicates of Democrats, liberals, and beasts like Weissman certainly indicates that was the case. And I think we have to be very wary about this because of who Weissman is.
Bonnie Dauphiné asks, is all of our security hacks the cause of Hillary's secret server, credit bureaus, etc.?
Give me that again.
Is all of our security hacks the cause of Hillary's secret server? Then she wrote credit bureaus, etc.
The secret server certainly exposed a lot of documents to foreign penetration, and there were at least 3 foreign intelligence agencies that penetrated it and that got copies of these emails. But it's whether it was seminal in the basis of a whole range of things, we don't really know yet, and should be investigated. Now, we're back to being sponsored by the Patriot Gold Group, and I want to just give you this thinking. By the way, when I do this, I have bought and continue to buy gold from the Patriot Gold Group, and not from any other gold firm. So I'm not just speaking an ad, I'm telling you what I believe. If you want to understand why you need to buy gold, all you need to do is listen to Kim Jong-un of North Korea. As long as this maniac is loose in the world and controls nuclear weapons and missiles, ballistic missiles, the potential for a devastating global crisis is front and center. I mean, we could wake up tomorrow morning and learn that this maniac bombed Guam, and that the United States is having to retaliate and wipe out North Korea. It is potentially the most horrific crisis that the world has ever faced, and certainly since World War II. And it really actualizes the possibility of nuclear war. And that's why gold has gone up by about 20% since the first of the year, because people are going into gold because that is the traditional safe refuge. When currencies are in question, when the global economy is falling apart, people go to gold because it's a safe harbor. Once you own gold, everybody will honor it. Everybody will give you any kind of currency in return for it. And it does not lose its value when foreign currencies and American currencies drop, because government can't print gold. It has to be a physical metal. And while you can mine gold, it's a long process and not one which you can create and do easily. And the very scarcity of it creates a real security in owning gold. Now, I'm sorry.
Oh, we have questions, yes. Darlene Meyer-Rubin asks, do you agree Bush is against President Trump, and why?
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit later about Bush's comments. Bush gave this speech, which was awful. I mean, there was nothing he said that was objectionable, but the context was entirely against Trump. He said bigotry is abroad in America, that it's gaining power in our political system. He had a wonderful line where he said bigotry is blasphemy, which it certainly is, because God created us all in his own image, and to demean anybody else is to demean the holy image in which we were created. It is blasphemy. But he was basically saying that the American people are increasingly being turned against one another, that our politicians are doing that that on all fronts you're seeing a racial sharpening of these divisions, and the implicit criticism was of Donald Trump for promoting policies on immigration and other issues that promote this confrontation. Remember, President Bush, 43 we're talking about, was a strong advocate of amnesty on immigration and did not want to build the wall, and has taken positions different from Trump's on many, many issues. Now, look, Donald Trump exists as a reaction against George Bush, okay? The reason Trump was able to win the Republican nomination is that people had had it with the Republican Party of Bush. They felt, in my judgment correctly, that the Bush family put the interests of the global community ahead of the needs of the American worker. I think they felt that the Bush family was oblivious to the dangers posed by China, was supportive of NAFTA, did not do anything to crack down on outsourcing, and proposed very little in the way of a major break from the orthodoxy of the Democratic Party. And it was the failure of these Republicans to stand up to the Democrats and to demand change that really occasioned the Trump candidacy. And can you want a better expression of it than that the front runner for the nomination was Jeb Bush, and that Trump absolutely demolished him, not just at the election, but in the debates, trivializing him, mocking him, and really showing how totally inadequate this guy was to be president. And I think that the Bush family has it in for Trump. I think it's based on nothing much more than a personal grudge because of the way they tore his brother apart in the presidential election. But that wouldn't have worked, except for the fact that Bush allowed it to work because of the blind spots. Bush used to be, as a governor of Florida, Jeb, a very good governor, a very conservative guy. People would always say, oh, they elected the wrong Bush. The policy wonk, the guy who really is hands-on policy, is Jeb, and he would be the best president of the three. But in his second term as governor, and in the years since he became governor, he changed. And he became more in favor of immigration, perhaps influenced by his wife, and became much, much more tolerant of crime and other issues where he had been much more forceful before. And I think that's behind what Bush did. And I think it really demeans the legacy of his family when he gets involved in a way like that. And it emphasizes why we rejected Bush as a candidate, because we thought Bush Clinton was two halves of the same coin, not two opponents. It's worth noting, by the way, that Bush left office, George Bush III, the 43, left office with a 27% approval rating, the lowest in history. And that should tell us something about how much we should listen to his criticisms of Trump.
We have 1,000 people watching right now as we speak.
Wow, that's great.
Live, yes. But this is a little off topic, but Lee Shaw wants to know, there's a new fellow running against McCaskill in Missouri. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know him. And in fact, I don't remember the name. But he is apparently someone who Steve Bannon is encouraging. And I'd be very interested in that. McCaskill escaped by the skin of her teeth last time in 2010. She had this crazy opponent named Todd Akin, who had won a conservative primary. And McConnell and the others said he couldn't win, and then went out and said that a woman who was raped in a natural rape, which he never explained what that was, that her body has the means of self-aborting the pregnancy, and that rather than abortion should be what we rely on. And this was a theory that Mr. Atkin had on his own, and nobody was able to much figure out why he had it or what he was talking about, and he was excoriated for it. And he took a Senate race we were on the verge of winning and blew it up and lost it. By the way, while I was away, McConnell, majority leader, gave a speech standing right next to Trump, where he said that we have lost 4 Senate seats in the last 3 elections because of right-wing candidates who defeated establishment Republican candidates. and the establishment candidates would have won, and these four characters all lost. It was in Breitbart, and I wrote a column for Breitbart rebutting that. I pointed out that one of them was this character, Todd Aiken. Another one was who defeated my former client, Sarah Steelman, who would have won, but still Aiken could have won. And Richard Murdoch, who I worked for also, who defeated Lugar, the senator from Indiana, longtime chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And Lugar had basically forgotten where Indiana was. His address there was a post office box, a drop, and then he changed it to his mother's house, where he'd never lived since he was a kid. And he almost never went back to Indiana, and Murdoch really made that point. Then Murdoch blew himself up a week before the election by saying that if a woman was raped and was impregnated by the rapist, that was God's will. So bye-bye Murdoch. But those two statements are just nutty statements made by people who didn't think as they were talking. And it's not an indictment of Bannon or of conservatives or of hard-right candidates. It's an indictment of two people with foot and mouth disease. And it's got nothing to do with ideology. Of the other two examples he cites, one of them is the woman who lost to Sharon Angle, who lost to Harry Reid in Nevada. And presumably Sue Loudon, the establishment candidate, might have done a better job had she won the primary. But that's all speculative. And Reid is a very tough customer with an organization that controls everything in Vegas. All the casinos, all the unions, all the workers. And, since essentially Nevada is two cities, Reno and Las Vegas, and Las Vegas by far the larger, if you control the town, you control the state, you control the Senate seat. And it's a pretty corrupt town, and Harry Reid is right in the center of it, making money hand over fist. And it's not easy to defeat that kind of a corrupt organization. The other example he cited, he's probably got a case. Christine O'Donnell, who lost for the Senate seat in Delaware, upended Mike Castle, who was a former Delaware governor and 9-term congressman, who probably could have won that seat, the seat Joe Biden vacated. Delaware is a very Democratic state. So with that one seat, he's got a case. But there are many other instances of insurgents, like Ted Cruz, for example, who upended the establishment candidate in the primary and went on to an enormous victory and fundamentally changed the politics of the United States. And Cruz, McConnell just conveniently forgot that.
Well, John Jeffrey asks, he states that the GOP has failed. Will there ever be a new political party beside the Tea Party?
This is all in flux. This is all up for grabs right now. We'll see if the Bannon initiative leads to that. We'll see if it leads to change within the Republican Party. In our two-party system with open primaries, there's really never an excuse for a third party, because anybody can run in the primary, anybody can put up their candidacy, and if they can win a majority of the votes, they can win the nomination. Back in the days when Theodore Roosevelt had to get nominated against William Howard Taft in 1912, there was a case for a third party, the Progressive Bull Moose Party, because the bosses, Roosevelt won all the primaries and they refused to give him the nomination. But now I think the issue is, can you win the primaries? And I think we may be on the verge of a fundamental change in the Republican Party in the direction broadly indicated by Donald Trump.
Well, John Cahill wrote in and asks, do you think the Weinstein's case came out to cover up a possible another Fast and Furious gone awry in Las Vegas?
No. I don't know. There could be info that I don't know about, but at the moment, no. Now, I want to share an insight with you, and I'm not entirely sure what to do with this. Christopher Wray, that's W-R-A-Y, I think the W is silent, the new head of the FBI, just appointed by Donald Trump, gave a speech today to FBI employees, which was a very interesting speech, and I don't know what to make of it. There's a real chance that he's essentially explaining why he's not going to do anything against Hillary or or any of the obvious culprits that are out there. Or is he? Is he saying that, or is he saying that we should go after those folks? I'm just not sure. Let me read it to you. At some point, for everybody in this room and everybody in my organization, the FBI, our integrity will be tested. It happens to everybody. It happens to all of us. And it could be at a time when we're being asked to make a decision that is inconsistent with what we know is right and what we know is true. Where we'll be asked to do something without fully thinking it through. Now, what's he talking about here? Is he talking about the Trump-Russia investigation, and is he saying that Trump's wrong and that this is not thought through and that we shouldn't be on the case? Or is he saying we're being asked to go after Hillary or exonerate Trump, and that's wrong? It's hard to understand where that's coming from. But remember that when he took office as FBI director, he's inheriting an organization of hardened, deep left-wing liberals. In our book, Rogue Spooks, we explain that. And we explain how the FBI went from a red agency to a blue agency, and how they deliberately set people up and fired them and replaced them with people who would be as left as you could get. And now Wray has inherited that, the secret state, or the deep state. And he may be saying here that I have to go slow because I need to be able to carry my agency with me when I propose changes. It could be at a time we think no one will notice, no one will know, the FBI chief said. It's a little bit like the Bible, where Jesus says, you know, God's going to come for us and we don't know when, so we have to be ready. I would argue that actually those are the times where we need to stay most true to our core integrity and our professionalism, to think critically and thoughtfully and to do what's right, not just for ourselves individually so we can look ourselves in the mirror as leaders, but for our agencies and the government and the public that we serve. I happen to be a big believer in process and left foot, right foot kind of grinding it out day in, day out. I think there's actually something quite noble about focusing on work itself and the process and doing the right thing, but in the right way. After treating everybody with respect, regardless of whether they're on the same side of the table or the other side of the table, and not cutting corners. Read this, Mr. Andrew Weissman. We are a country built on checks and balances. The reality is that nobody likes being checked, and that's often where the danger is. People are in such a hurry, and you start drinking your own Kool-Aid, and you're convinced that because your intentions are, you think, pure, whatever it is you must be pure as well. I think that's where I think most things can go off the rails probably most easily. It's sometimes very hard to speak truth to power, as they say. And for those in power, it can be particularly tough to hear the truth. So I believe this statement, this kind of Hamlet-like soliloquy, really portends maybe some really bold action from him. Good or bad, I'm not sure. But I wanted to share this with you and get your thoughts about it. It's one of the oddest statements I've heard a public official make. It's obviously correct. It's obviously courageous to say it. It's obviously very good that he thinks it and that he's able to articulate it. But where does it lead him? Is he talking about the conventional wisdom railroading Donald Trump? Is agency participating in that? Or is he talking about standing up, as Hamlet said, against a sea of troubles and in opposing them, end them? We'll see.
Well,
sorry for all the Shakespeare, guys.
Well, Michelle Graver asks, what do you think about the Virginia candidate Ed Gillespie?
I love Ed Gillespie. He's a great guy. He's terrific. He's a solid conservative. He's one of the mechanics, if you will, that built the whole conservative movement that we have today. I hope he wins. And I particularly dislike Terry McAuliffe, who's the governor of Virginia. I worked very closely with him in the Clinton campaign. And he's the one that wove, like a spider, this web of influence for money and for power that has dominated the Clinton organization. And since the Democratic candidate is kind of in that tradition, I really hope Gillespie wins.
Ron Henderson asks, how close do you think we are to a failed state?
Not very. I think that you're watching the correction going on. I mean, it is pretty incredible what Trump is doing and what Bannon is doing. And you're watching this correction. I think we're closing in on a failed state, but thank God Trump won the election, and thank God it's bringing about fundamental change.
And Julie for Lizzo asks, is Mueller protecting Clinton or going after Trump?
Going after Trump, but in the process protecting Clinton. I don't particularly see Mueller has motivation to protect Clinton, but certainly has motivation to go after Trump. Now, just one or two other things I wanted to note. Jobless claims are the lowest since 1973. That's AD, by the way. 1973. 44 years, the lowest jobless claims for the month. I mean, could you want more evidence of the success of Trump's deregulatory economic policies? It's incredible. And another interesting thing, the cost, the spending for traveling nurses who aren't assigned in an area but move from job to job, has more than tripled since the start of the year. That's what I've been saying, that you only have so many doctors and so many nurses. And when you open health care to everybody, no matter how sick or non-sick they are, without increasing the number of doctors and nurses, you create a shortage. And that shortage will either be allocated by price or by rationing. If you let the marketplace do it, it'll be by price. The people that can pay the most will get the best. Those who pay the least get short shrift. But if you don't think that's fair, and where issues of life and death are concerned, it obviously isn't, then it gets rationed by a bureaucrat, by need, by the bureaucrats setting up rules. And those rules are inevitably corrupt, self-serving, usually wrong and insensitive. And we don't want either of those, either profit or regulation. What we need is more nurses and more doctors. So let's get moving on legislation, offering nurses partial repayment of student loans, new doctors the same thing, perhaps tax breaks, and let's really encourage the number of, expand the number of doctors and nurses. Last thing I just want to say is that I reported a few weeks ago, prematurely, that the IRS had announced that it would not require you to provide health insurance information when you file your taxes. They have now reversed themselves and said, we will require it. Now, Trump had earlier indicated that they were not. Trump has kept two guys in place from the Obama administration, the head of the VA and the head of the IRS. Both were agencies enmeshed up to their necks in scandal. The conservative targeting of groups and the backlogs at the VA. And you got to be suspicious of those agencies because they absolutely are not the nouveau regime. They are very much the Obama holdovers. And when the IRS pulls garbage like this, you got to have a serious look at it.
We have a few more questions. First of all, Brittany Pearson.
We'll take two more.
Two more? Okay. Brittany Pearson, her son is Little Jack.
Hey,
but she wants to know your thoughts on President Trump not going to California to see the fire damage.
Well, you know, he's got to stay home and do some work sometime. I mean, this guy, the number of disasters and stuff that he's been at has been incredible. And he's really touring the world doing that. And he has made disaster aid available. Fires are not really primarily a FEMA jurisdiction. They're much more a state issue. And perhaps he should be doing more. But rather than criticize him for the symbolic absence of a visit, let's get down to brass tacks and see if FEMA and the feds are doing their jobs or not. And then if they're not, let's talk about why Trump isn't out there. Let's approach this on a functional basis, not a symbolic one.
And Hector Morales wants to know, please explain what can be done to a media, CNN, that is not reporting, but working as a propaganda wing of the Democratic Party.
You can stop watching them. Now, today is Friday. And first of all, selfie of the day goes to Kim Noriega, who was sent in a photo holding a copy of Rogue Spooks, our book, and it's to be posted on our homepage. Let me
and
just
in
say
the comments
that,
here too.
in the comments section here, let me just say to Kim and everybody that every prediction in Rogue Spooks is coming true. We highlight Putin's efforts to go after the uranium supply. We highlight the shielding of Hillary for her criminality. And all this stuff is coming true. So if you want to stop reading the newspaper, just read Rogue Spooks, because it's all there. Now, we have from Sir Winston today, because it's Friday, not a funny quote, but probably one of the most moving quotes I've ever heard of his. On the 26th of May, 1940, things looked very, very bleak for Britain and the civilized world. The Germans had just invaded France a week or two before and had conquered Belgium and Holland and Norway and were in Denmark and were rifling their way through France. And they had sent the French army reeling back, flanking them by going around behind the Maginot Line where the bulk of the French were stationed on the German-French border. And they came down from Holland and Belgium to come behind their lines and surround the French. And the French units surrendered, and it looked like France would fall, which it did 3 or 4 weeks later. This was about 3 weeks before Dunkirk. And the issue was, what would Britain do? Would Britain pull its troops out, or would it send more good troops after bad into a hopeless strategic situation? Or would Britain accept Hitler's secret overtures and make peace? Hitler always said he needed to fight France, but he didn't need to fight Britain. He certainly didn't need to fight the United States. In fact, his theories of racial dominance accorded a high role to the Anglo-Saxons. It was the Latins and the Slavs that he was opposed to. And there was a member of Churchill's cabinet, Lord Halifax, who was really number 2 to Churchill in the Conservative Party, and was seriously considered as an alternative for Prime Minister when Chamberlain, the Prime Minister who led the appeasement policy, resigned. So there was a meeting of the military cabinet, the war cabinet, and Chamberlain pretty well controlled that, and Halifax, and they said we should open negotiations with the Germans. We should see if we can get honorable terms. But Churchill, as Prime Minister, outflanked him and called a meeting of the outer cabinet, which is the full British cabinet of 30 or 40 MPs who serve in it, the broader establishment, really, and leadership of the Conservative Party. And he gave a really passionate speech to them. And I want to quote from some of it. If this long island history of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground. Quite a statement.
Sure is.
If this long island story of ours is to end at last, if this long island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground. Wow. Saying that to the cabinet. I mean, my God. I mean, is that leadership or what? Each one of us lies choking in his own blood on the ground. Needless to say, the cabinet voted to fight on, and Britain did, and ultimately defeated the Nazis with help from us. Well, thanks for watching, folks, and please share this. We had 1,000 people watching it at one point.
1,200. We had 1,200.
Yes. Wow, that's kind of high for the last few weeks, and I think it was pretty important. Thanks a lot.